Today we are going back for a New York groove. There's a new rock and roll memoir out entitled Almost Grown, a New York memoir. So how does it stack up to recent New York City rock and roll books? If you're looking for some gritty stories with attitude about one of rock and roll's most epic epicenters, let's head to the five boroughs and get into some great New York City rock and roll tales. New York City is full of rock and roll history, but not every name that makes up the history is someone that most people would know. And not many of those people have the ability to articulate what makes this place so special. There are a few books out there that have nailed it though, and today I'm going to turn you on to a few of those. Welcome into the Rock Talk Studio podcast, where the conversation is all about rock and roll history and culture through the books, docs, stories, and products that matter. I'm your host, Big Rick, and I'm starting this conversation with a book you can add to that Better Than the Rest New York City book list. It just came out and it needs the spotlight. The book is called Almost Grown, a New York City memoir by musician Jesse Malin. The book is co-written with the help of Deborah Devi. And before Malin kicks this off and kind of gets into his life story, he starts with talk about a horrible health issue that came on him a few years ago. While he was having dinner, he arrived at the restaurant and he was having some back pain. And then he was telling his friends, hey, my back really hurts. He got up and he fell down and he couldn't get back up. He was taken to the hospital and he was diagnosed with having a spinal stroke. And that stroke has left him paralyzed from the waist down for years. And knowing that before he starts to tell the story of his life kind of puts this thing in a different perspective to begin the story. But even without that, and without his health challenge, starting the book when he was just a little kid, you get to see how much he was a survivor. And he quickly became a kid of the streets of New York City. And he was going to clubs and venues to see bands. It just became second nature to him to do it when he was young. And we're talking New York City 70s and 80s. So the CBGBs, Max's Kansas City, the Palladium in Queens. Living in New York City really affected his outlook on life. And his parents were getting divorced at the time too, so it added even an extra layer of what he was going through. Really on in his life, he started his own band and started playing clubs when he was around 14 years old. And all the grit and the grime and the insane maneuverings is easily portrayed by his writing style. It's very easy to absorb. He just seems to have the foresight of where to go and how to stay in front of what was coming next musically. And the book just takes you along for the ride as Malin grows up in rock and roll. And though he never really made it big at his career, he created a place for himself in New York City. How and why did he do that? Well, he loved the raw, decadent scene of the city, and his words bring to life the grit of the streets and the people that made up his pretty broad inner circle. There are a ton of characters in this, great New York City characters, and they float in and out of his life. And along the way, Jesse Malin becomes this, I call him an entity. He becomes this entity that was important in New York City rock and roll. And Jesse Malin became this big connector of people. He had the uncanny ability to find himself running into music legends. He met Joey Ramone while on his way to see Rock and Roll High School, which the Ramones were in. Joe Strummer would look him up when he came to town. And then eventually he found out that Bruce Springsteen was a fan of his and wanted to collaborate. And even though he was playing CBGB at 14, and then Madison Square Garden, he opened up for Kiss in his early 20s with his band Degeneration, probably the most famous band he was in. The headline moments were memorable, but they didn't tell the whole story. Between them is a life of restless hustling, uncertainty, and perseverance, big time. From the outside, his career can seem almost charmed, but it was forged through hard work and a kind of lucky timing that a lot of musicians hope for. Lucinda Williams is quoted on the cover of the book. She says, Almost Grown stands toe-to-toe with the Basketball Diaries as a story about growing up in New York. And that's some pretty heavy praise. The Basketball Diaries, if you're familiar with it, they made a movie out of it with Leonardo DiCaprio. This book, Malin's story, doesn't have the heavy drug undertones that Carroll's book and life did. Malin's writing gives you a sense of what it was like to be a young artist in New York, where you could be broke, struggle and somehow keep it going. I think that's where the comparison to Jim Carroll's The Basketball Diaries makes sense, and the New York City vibe, without a doubt. For more than 4 decades, Jesse Malin has carried the sound, the grit, and the restless spirit of New York City with him. In this memoir, he tells a raw, hard-earned story forged in clubs, in back rooms, in city streets, and he has written a book here that sits among the best of the New York City street-level tales. You even get an update of his current condition at the end of the book as he struggles to walk again and even take the stage one more time so he can perform. Jesse Malin, Almost Grown, a New York City memoir, runs 272 pages, and I highly recommend it. Speaking of the best of the New York City tales, time to jump on the A train and head to a few other titles. I'm going to start with a book that not only sits on the great New York City rock and roll book lists, but easily has a place in my top 5 rock and roll books of all time. If you like stories like these about rock and roll history and culture, and you want to stay up to date on all the books and the docs and the stories and the products that are out there, I've got something for you. And that's my newsletter. I call it the Rock Talk Studio Blast. It comes out once a month, the last Friday of each month, and is totally free. And it keeps you up to date on all the comings and goings of what's going on. The latest issue featured an update on the new Oasis documentary, the new Alice Cooper memoir that's coming out, the new Greg Allman documentary. If you'd like to get this newsletter sent to your email every month, all you have to do is subscribe. Again, it's free. I'm going to put a little link in the show notes. That's the description of the podcast. Wherever you listen to your podcast, there's going to be a little description. Just go in there, click the link. It'll take you to the free subscription page. Sign up and get the newsletter sent to you every month. Okay, here's some other New York grooves for you. A New York City memoir doesn't get much better than Patti Smith's Just Kids. It's a deeply personal account of her relationship with her friend and photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, and it talks about their early years together when they're young, totally broke, and they're artists trying to find their place in New York City. It begins when they arrive in the city, and it follows them through the clubs and the hotels and the streets and just this artistic circle that they formed in the late 60s and 70s. Patti Smith captures New York filled with people who would eventually become cultural icons, but the famous names, Andy Warhol, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Carroll's in there, Bob Dylan, Allen Ginsberg, are almost secondary here. It's at its heart, this is a story of just 2 young people bound together by love and their friendship and their ambition and an absolute belief that somehow they could build lives around making art. It's very inspiring. And what separates Just Kids from a typical rock memoir is Patti Smith's writing. She approaches these years as a poet rather than a celebrity looking back on, her glory days. And she writes with such tenderness about Mapplethorpe and talks about their struggles and a creative New York that has largely disappeared. There's plenty of rock and roll history here, but the book ultimately really reaches beyond music. It's about their youth and being an artist and being in love and loss and what remains after the people and the places that shaped you are gone. Smith promised Robert Mapplethorpe before his death in 1989 that she would someday tell her story, and Just Kids became the fulfillment of that promise. I think a lot of people are glad she did because it's a tremendous book. Really, it's on the top of my list of New York City books. And as I mentioned, it's in my top 5 rock and roll books at all time, Just Kids by Patti Smith. Patti released her second memoir, kind of a follow-up to this, called Bread of Angels at the end of last year. I reviewed it here on the podcast. You can find it in the archives. Another really great memoir talking about her husband and the years after she moved away from New York City and gave up her career and then came back to music again. So if you've read Just Kids, which I know a lot of people have, Bread of Angels is a really cool follow-up. I can't talk New York City memoirs or New York City books without talking about one of the best ones of all time. It came out years ago. It's called Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk by Legs McNeil and Gillian McCain. It's the definitive firsthand count of the mid-70s New York punk scene. And this one's told through the voices of the musicians and the artists and the writers. It came out originally in 2006, and then they did a 20th anniversary edition. If you're interested in the Velvet Underground, the New York Dolls, Iggy Pop, Television, Ramones, Blondie, and all the characters orbiting that world, this one is an essential book. I like that you get to see how this relatively small collection of musicians and artists and writer and club owners kept colliding with each other, and how something that initially had no commercial value eventually changed popular culture and rock and roll. Nearly 30 years after its original 1996 publication, it still feels immediate. I read it a couple years ago. It's not necessarily the book to read if you want a scholarly explanation of why punk mattered. It's more a book to read if you want to feel like you were there when it happened. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you, and love talking great New York City tales here on the podcast. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll catch you next time in the Rock Talk studio.